What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I know I'm a little tardy to the party, but we're gonna watch the Moon Knight trailer. So let's do this. Well, I don't know if it's really a trailer, it's more of a first look, but we're gonna check it out because, God, I'm so excited about Moon Knight. Damn.
I can't tell the difference between my waking life and dreams.
The voice in your head.
Jesus.
It devours you.
Okay, so that little teaser trailer was cool. It was really just Disney just being like, it exists, right? Like, it's gonna be coming at some point along the line. I can't wait to see what an actual full-on trailer looks like, but from what we did see, it looked great. Like, I love the scene where he's just like pummeling the guy, just like beating the crap out of the guy. It looks like it's gonna be pretty dark, man. Like, it looks like it's really gonna be like, it's gonna be very similar to Batman, which brings us into a very interesting point, and I have to say this. Moon Knight fans hate it when you say this, but it's actually an accurate statement. Moon Knight is basically Marvel's Batman. So one of the funny things about this is like when you break it down, it's actually kind of funny, right? So like Moon Knight fans will be like, he's nothing like Batman. Really, what makes him different from Batman? Well, the billionaire aspect, the billionaire personality is not named Bruce Wayne, it's named Steve Grant, right? And the persona that Moon Knight uses to go underground and infiltrate the criminal underworld, it's not Matches Malone, his name is Jake Lockley, all right? He doesn't throw batarangs, he throws moon rings, right? It's totally different. They're not the same character at all. Totally separate. That's basically the argument that Moon Knight fans make. I'm sorry, Moon Knight fans. I gotta poke at you guys a little bit. You know it's true. I mean, you know it's true, right? I mean, any Moon Knight fan who's honest with himself knows that it's true. But here's the cool thing about this, right? In all honesty, and for real and for true, right? All joking aside, if I really am kind of comparing the two, I think Moon Knight's a lot more interesting. And here's the reason why. So the idea behind Moon Knight as a character is that he's basically a guy named Mark Spector. At least that's how he originally started out. He was a former Marine and a CIA operative who basically ended up becoming a mercenary. Eventually, he worked alongside an archaeologist and a guy named Bushman, who was also a mercenary. And then during this great big huge archaeological dig, Bushman basically betrayed everybody, killed the archaeologist, and left Mark Spector for dead. Eventually, Mark Spector is taken before this statue of an Egyptian god named Khonshu, and then suddenly just wakes up. He basically is totally healed and all that kind of cool stuff. Right now, all this stuff is covered in the original Werewolf by Night number 32, which is when he originally first appeared. The bigger issue here is you never really understood the nature of Khonshu. You didn't know if he was real or if he was just kind of some aspect of Mark Spector's consciousness, whatever the case was, but he ended up basically stating this idea that he was supposed to effectively be a superhero on Earth, avenging the wicked in the name of Khonshu and just kind of going forward and doing his own thing. Eventually you find out Khonshu is actually real, right? That he is actually a god that exists out there. Now, over the years, Mark Spector has had some really, really cool situations and cool stories. But the way this worked was that in order to effectively do his job, right, to basically be a superhero out there, that Mark Spector fashioned the identity of Moon Knight. Now, that's the first thing to keep in mind. The second thing is he needed identities that would let him infiltrate different aspects of society. An identity that would let him infiltrate the criminal underworld, or at the very least keep his ear to the ground and understand the kind of rumblings that are going on out there. And the second one was to actually infiltrate white collar crime, to basically be a guy that could get in with the super rich and find out what nefarious things they're doing so he could ultimately stop them. The ear to the ground, the kind of infiltrating the criminal underworld personality, or at least identity, that was Jake Lockley. He was a cab driver. The super rich billionaire guy, that's Steve Grant. Right now, here's the funny thing about this. Over the years in Marvel Comics, if you look at the stories, right, the old Doug Mink stories and all that kind of stuff, Marvel kind of teased this idea that Mark Spector was sort of losing himself to a degree. And all these different stories actually came to a head in the most recent run by Jeff Lemire, which was a phenomenal one. Not really the most recent, there's actually an ongoing run right now, but the run before that by Jeff Lemire was a really, really, really good run. In effect, what had happened here is that Mark Spector had transitioned between his identities so often that he actually began to forget who he was, that he basically started developing dissociative identity disorder. Now, that was the initial stepping stone, right? This idea that he was so ingrained in these personalities that you didn't know where Mark Spector ended and Steve Grant began. And you didn't know if it was actually Steve Grant and he was pretending to be Mark Spector somewhere along the line. That's where all the stories really began to go crazy, right? They really began to mesh, kind of come together, so he didn't really know who he was. Now, in more recent years, one of the things that you've also learned is that the identities of like Jake Lockley and those guys, that those are actually a result of the dissociative identity disorder that Mark Spector struggles with. In effect, there are multiple personalities that manifested through his childhood. They've always been there, they just didn't come out until recently. And so the cool thing about Jeff Lemire's run is it was actually all these personalities meeting each other for the first time. And it was great, right? Like all the personalities met and then basically coalesced to figure out who's who and like who Mark Spector actually is, right? It was a phenomenal story. I won't ruin any more than that, but I would highly suggest you guys check it out. I feel like we started it over at Comics Explained and then never finished it. The important thing about this is that for the TV show, I don't know how far reaching this is gonna be. One of the things to know is that in the comics, at least in the early days, and it's one of those things that's kind of waxed and waned with Mark Spector's character over the years, is that whenever there was a full moon, he was basically empowered by Khonshu, right? So like his strength, speed, durability, all that kind of stuff would be enhanced. He'd be a far more capable and powerful fighter. Now, we're also talking within reason, right? It's not like there'd be a full moon and Moon Knight would be like on par with the Incredible Hulk. That's not really what happened. Although there was one point where he fought the Grey Hulk in Vegas. That was cool. That was an amazing story. I loved that story. That was so cool. When he fought Joe Fixit Hulk, that was awesome. But outside of that, there really isn't too much to go on with Moon Knight. It's really more of the circumstances in his stories that make him wildly interesting. Now, with the show itself, this could be a pretty simple and easy to understand show, or it could feel like Legion from FX. If I'm being honest with you guys, I'm kind of hoping it feels like Legion, because what made Legion so cool was the fact that you didn't know what was going on. You didn't know if he was like hallucinating, if all of it was actually happening, if it was all inside of his head, if he really was just surrounded by people that all had just crazy extraordinary powers and he was in an actual tangible location. None of these things were made readily available. And so it was really, really confusing, but also exciting at the outset because it was like a giant mystery that you wanted to solve. And that, I imagine, is something they're gonna roll with when it comes to this show, that over time you're going to see the initial introduction of Mark Spector as the mercenary, and then the events are going to unfold, which will likely involve Bushman, and then he'll basically be betrayed, he'll meet the Egyptian god Khonshu, and he'll go forward as Moon Knight, crafting that identity for himself. Then he's going to create the identity of Jake Lockley, then he's going to create the identity of Steve Grant, and he's going to kind of infiltrate society in those different and varying roles. But as the show progresses, he's not gonna know who he is. The other thing about this though is if you look at it, it almost looks like he kind of snaps, right? He kind of loses his mind in the sense that like he just wakes up with like all these bodies around him. So it could be where it's very, very similar to the movie Split, right? Where he really does have multiple personality disorder, and that one of the alters, as they call it, takes over, and then during that time, Mark Spector blacks out. He doesn't know what happens, which there's actually precedence for this. That was the basis behind the old Incredible Hulk stories, right? Like in the old Incredible Hulk stories, whenever the Incredible Hulk persona came out, Bruce Banner would never know what the Incredible Hulk did. He had basically blacked out. He was just in this giant kind of darkness, would have no idea what's going on, and then suddenly the Incredible Hulk persona would revert, and Bruce Banner would come back out, and then he'd have to deal with whatever the aftermath was of what the Incredible Hulk did. That was how Marvel kind of explained why Banner was always on the run, right? Because Incredible Hulk was just a big lumbering, rampaging beast. But I imagine you could see that happening with Moon Knight, right? That he has multiple personality disorder, one of the alters takes over, and that Mark Spector just kind of has to deal with the aftermath of this, right? Trying to figure out what's going on, why all this is happening. Because if he is just in bed one day, right? If he's like, okay, it's time for me to lay down and go to bed, and then he wakes up in somebody else's house, bodies all around him, he's not gonna know what's going on. So the show may very well be kind of exist in two parts, right? That one part is Mark Spector trying to understand what in the hell's going on around him, and the other part is actually us kind of figuring out what's going on around him and watching as essentially Oscar Isaac tries to understand what's happening himself, right? I don't know if that makes any sense. Very similar to like Christopher Nolan's Memento, if that makes any sense. But regardless, I'm excited for the show. It looks like it's gonna be really, really, really cool. Regardless, man, like I'm glad to see Moon Knight's finally getting some attention. The one thing I'm hoping for the most is that the show is actually gonna be really, really dark and really, really gritty. Not too much so, but enough that you can walk away and be like, okay, so like Moon Knight's definitely somebody to like never trifle with, right? Because if Marvel and Disney are really gonna go in the direction of the Midnight Sun, so like Blade, Ghost Rider, Morbius, all that kind of stuff, you're gonna need a dark Moon Knight, right? Like a brutal and dark Moon Knight. You're gonna need that guy, because if they're gonna do what I think they're gonna do with Midnight Suns, it'll be brutal and it'll be dark. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.